So we're really fortunate to talk to some great people around New Zealand about property, facilities, asset management, and also those that use the built environment for their operational businesses. So thought we'd bring it right back home to our HQ here in Rangiora for Niche FM and introduce you to Caleb Ford. G'day, Caleb.
G'day, how are you?
So Caleb's our Executive Manager for Niche FM. He's been with us for about 2 years and works pretty much across most areas of the business. And also heads our project management division, so out and about doing things with various clients and making sure that compliance is happening. So you know the drill, 3 questions for you and then you can ask me one. So the first question is where do you come from, what's your background and how did you end up here?
Oh, I've got a very broad background, so hold on tight. So my history is not actually specifically in the built environment. I come from a rural background. I started farming at a young age, worked my way up through the farming industry to the stage where I was converting large-scale dairy farms, project managing the conversions, and obviously as well as running the projects. So that led me through a path of obviously farming as well as converting the farms, but through that we got involved in dairy industry awards and all sorts of things. So we excelled in the rural industry, got to the stage where I sort of thought to myself, well, you know, what else can these skills be used for outside of farming? I didn't see myself doing that forever. There's only so many farms you can convert before it sort of becomes copy paste. Mm-hmm. So you know, I thought, well, let's have a crack at the building industry for lack of better description, but more so facilities. And obviously with Ryan being my brother-in-law and his business was only very fresh at that stage, so 2 years ago. It seemed like an ideal transition to jump in and give it a go, really. So I guess just to carry on from that, what amazed me was how the skills that I had learnt through project managing, obviously on the rural side, transferred perfectly or almost perfectly, apart from some of the acronyms and code words people use, into the built environment. So in fact, I've often used that analogy when talking to clients, is that I describe a large-scale building almost like an operational farm, and the systems behind the scenes rather, absolutely fascinated me to get once I started getting involved. So that's where I've come from, and,
cool.
and how I got to where I am now. So.
Yeah, it's been really interesting transformation. I mean, it's been really seamless coming in, and just going back to one of the comments Caleb made was around the acronyms, especially on the facilities management acronyms. And we actually have a bit of a joke about developing a book of all these different acronyms. Now,
a few hundred pages, I think. Now.
A few hundred pages. So there's acronyms that have come from his background that are completely different to what we have in our side. So that's been a bit of a interesting process. And in fact, we had a discussion with a construction manager today who uses very similar acronyms that we do in facilities management, and we're actually sitting there scratching our heads. So going back to one of the videos I made earlier this year was about keeping it simple and just be exact and deliberate. So that's really interesting. Now, with the types of clients that you're working with now, what do you see as the biggest challenge or opportunity in the industry from what you were doing to what you're seeing now? Obviously you've been working around the compliance space quite a bit, but what's the biggest challenge that you see in working with the clients that we have who may not have a facilities management grasp or understanding?
Yeah, look, that's a good question. I think looking back on the 2 years and sort of where I started with Niche FM and where we've come to now, I think one of the biggest things that struck me is how complicated people make facilities management, which encompasses obviously things like compliance, which you've touched on, but also project management and just general facilities management and maintenance tasks. So really it's not that complicated, all right? But people that have been in the industry for a long period of time and probably their whole careers, and some people 20 or 30 years that we've talked to, they describe the simplest frigging thing as like you didn't need a degree in order to do it. And really, what I like to bring to the table that others perhaps can't or don't is how can we cut through that complicated jargon and get down to get rid of the noise, cut down to the simple stuff, make it simple so you can explain it to the client as to what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how it's going to add value or minimise risk at their business.
Yeah, and again, I can't reiterate this enough, is around that simplicity quote that I always say, and it's so important. I mean, we've been to meetings together where we've talked about facilities management with facilities management people, and we've actually walked away going, what are they talking about?
That's
so
right,
we've had to go away and actually research. But maybe it's a little bit of education around that space. Obviously, every industry has a different view of the world on what facilities management is. There is a definite confusion between facilities management and facilities maintenance, which we will cover in detail. But that's really interesting, and it's been very good. It's actually been a breath of fresh air for me to work with someone who hasn't come from the FM world, because he just smashes through the noise and just gets things done. At the end of the day, that's what we're there to do. So the last question is, Caleb, what do you actually do? What's a typical day look like for you with us?
Yeah, cool. So a typical day for me at Niche FM is quite varied. I get involved with more or less all of the day-to-day tasks in some capacity, but predominantly I focus on projects. So I head up the project team for Niche FM, and the projects for us can be anything from office fit-outs to construction through to remedials and fire separations, or a whole raft of things, anything to do with the building or anything attached to the building or around it. So as you can imagine, that can be quite broad. So I deal with pretty much all of the project stuff, also on the ground dealing with that as well as at a high level. I assist with the compliance, which you've touched on earlier, with various clients. In fact, I've spent a significant amount of time in the past 2 years doing compliance and compliance defects, which has been very educational in its own right. And as well as that, I've been involved in health checks, so FM health checks, which I believe you've done a video on already.
Yep.
And I also am heavily involved with the business development for the business itself. So as the business was growing, we were probably a wee bit slow on the uptake, I guess, in the business development plan. We sort of just flew from one thing to the next.
Yep.
And then eventually we thought, okay, now it's time to regroup and develop a whole sales, well, not sales because it's a terrible word, but a plan moving forward. How are we going to approach business? What areas do we want to target more so than others? And what is the approach we're going to take? So we spend a lot of time working around that and creating and managing a CRM tool. So that's a broad overview, but obviously from that you can see I'm involved in more or less most tasks at Niche FM in some capacity.
And the good thing about having Caleb and Rebecca and Mike and the team as a whole is that we all come with different experiences, knowledge and background within property. So whether it's infrastructure, rural, project management, environmental management, energy efficiencies, everyone's got their own part to play within the business, which is really exciting. So question for me before we finish?
Oh, look, I mean, you know everything, so it's hard to ask you questions, but I guess one question that I would like to ask is, and you've kind of already answered it, but what is it like working with someone that A, is your brother-in-law, but also doesn't come from a traditional FM background?
Good question. In fact, I'll answer the second question first, and that is, I quite enjoy working with people who don't come from a property background. One is they don't come with a preconceived idea of how things should be, especially when it's a prescribed piece of work. Obviously, engineering, structural engineers, mechanical, electrical and all that, you need that skill set, and it's critical, and those guys are worth their pound of flesh. It's really, really valuable to have. But it's really nice to have someone come in who doesn't have that, I guess, that baggage, that history, who's able just to cut through and just get things done. So I like it. In terms of working with family, I really enjoy it. I mean, I think the advantage is that when we disagree with things, we disagree nice and loud and robust and then move on really quickly. You perhaps can't do that with other staff members. So it is quite nice to have the ability to have some fairly robust and honest discussions.
Definitely.
But the next day you're going to have to move on because you're going to have dinner with mum and dad and Rebecca and all that. So it works out really well. So I think it's good. I think we've got a pretty good dynamic. We do in a roundabout way have various different family members working for the business, whether they're our family members or not. That's what New Zealand business is about. It's about supporting each other and getting out there. But I guess from my point of view, the community is our family as well. So we, Niche FM, with the Niche Group, we do a lot of work out in the community, and it's nice to be able to do that as a family. So
that's right.
It's good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just following on from my previous comments around where I've come from, I just want to stress to those that perhaps think an FM career or a property career isn't for them. Now that you understand where I've come from and the skills that I've brought to this industry, don't underestimate how your existing skills may transfer into an industry like FM or property in general. So you don't need to go to university and study a doctorate in FM, 8 years of study to get a piece of paper to say you can do this job. it's
stuck in.
just get stuck in and get it done and learn as you go. And if anyone is interested in getting involved in FM and has any questions, look, I'm sure Ryan would agree that reach out to us and ask us how we've done what we've done, and you never know, there may be gaps in niche FM down the track that might suit you.
Yep, and that's absolutely reiterate on that. If you have any questions, don't hesitate whatsoever to get in touch with us. And following on from Caleb's comment about not coming from an FM industry, I studied music at university. I didn't even know what facilities management was. So we all come from a very different background. Rebecca was a graphic designer. I think Mike worked in oil and gas initially, but whatever it may be, it doesn't matter. Get in touch with us. Thanks, Caleb. Enjoy
Awesome.
the kit. Thanks.